My name is Walter Greene, and I turned 72 last fall, though the mirror insists on calling me older. I still keep the same dining table I bought when Linda and I moved into our first real home in Ohio. It was a grand thing back then, a table for 6, heavy oak, polished every Sunday morning. I used to imagine my kids fighting over the corner seats, glasses clinking, laughter bouncing off the walls. Funny how a dream can outlive the people who once filled it. Now there's only one cup of tea on that big table. Earl Grey. Too strong. Too bitter. A cup for a man no one visits anymore. The chairs stand around me like witnesses who've run out of patience. I wasn't always the afterthought I am today. Back in the 90s, people in town used to say, if Mr. Greene teaches your kid, they'll be somebody. I taught history, the real kind, not the textbook kind. Kids loved my stories. Parents trusted me. Principals relied on me. My signature on a letter could open doors for a student. I used to matter. But life has a way of turning the page without asking if you're done reading. The loneliness didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like rust. First, the calls from my son, Michael, got shorter. Busy, Dad. I'll call later. Then my daughter, Emily, started missing holidays, blaming the kids' schedules. My grandkids, well, they don't even pretend. To them, I'm just some old man who forgets their birthdays. They don't know I stopped buying gifts only because last Christmas I mailed them and the package came back, unopened, marked returned to sender in a cold blue stamp. I remember the day the house finally went silent. No messages. No plans. No one needing anything. Just the dull hum of the refrigerator and my own breathing. I tried pretending it didn't hurt. Old men are supposed to accept things, right? We're supposed to be grateful we're still alive. Sit in our recliners, watch the news, smile politely at the delivery guy who calls us absurd like we're ghosts he doesn't want to acknowledge. But inside, a heaviness started sitting with me every morning. A weight I didn't invite. Yesterday did something to me. I'd gone to the local diner, the one with sticky menus and coffee that tastes like burnt hope. I sat at the counter out of habit. I used to go there every Friday with my former students, grown men and women now, who wanted advice or just wanted to catch up. That was years ago. "Morning, Walter," said Tom, the waiter, not looking up long enough to mean it. Then they walked in, 3 of my former students. I recognized them instantly. They'd sat in the front row, eager, bright-eyed. One had cried in my classroom the day she got her college acceptance letter. I'd hugged her and said, "You earned this." They walked right past me. Didn't see me. Didn't remember me. Didn't even glance. I opened my mouth, just a small breath of hope, but they laughed at something on a phone and moved to a booth. My name, the one that once carried weight in this town, didn't even stir the air. For the first time in years, the loneliness didn't just feel sad. It felt insulting. I left the diner without finishing my coffee. As I stepped outside, a strange calm washed over me, a quiet, razor-sharp clarity I hadn't felt in decades. They forgot me. All of them. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop waiting for anyone to remember. Something in me shifted. A hinge creaked. A door I didn't know was locked open. And that was the beginning of everything that followed. The morning after the diner incident, I woke before the sun. Not because of habit, because something inside me refused to sleep. It wasn't anger, not exactly. More like an old engine turning over after years of silence. A slow awakening of a part of me I thought had died. I boiled water, poured it over the tea bag, watched the steam curl up like a quiet invitation. My house was still the same, the faded wallpaper, the pictures of my kids smiling from decades ago, the clock ticking too loudly in the hall, but I wasn't. I sat at my table for 6 and whispered my own name. Walter Greene. It felt foreign. Or maybe forgotten, like a key I'd stopped using. When Linda was alive, she'd say, "Your name means something, Walt." Don't ever let the world shrink you. I used to laugh when she said that. I thought confidence was permanent, like a tattoo on the soul. Turns out it fades, too. Later that morning, I decided to walk to the community center. I hadn't been inside in over a year. Once upon a time, kids filled the place for my after-school sessions. I ran history clubs, debate nights, college prep circles. Parents trusted me with their children, the director trusted me with the keys. Now, I doubted they'd remember I used to work there. Inside, the lobby had a new receptionist, a young woman with bright blue headphones and an expression that said she'd rather be anywhere else. "Hi," I said, clearing my throat. Before I finished, she slid a clipboard toward me. "Sign in for senior activities are on Fridays." The words landed like a slap disguised as a form. I stared at the clipboard. Bingo night. Chair yoga. Crafts. Nothing wrong with those things, but that wasn't who I was. Not yet. "I came to see if the director is here," I said. She chewed gum loudly. "Do you have an appointment?" "Do I need one?" She shrugged, "The international sign for I don't care enough to answer you properly. Everybody needs one." I almost turned around. Almost let the world tell me I didn't belong here anymore. But then something strange happened. A voice I hadn't heard in years spoke up from behind me, strong, theater deep, unmistakable. "Mr. Greene." I turned. There stood Daniel Holt, one of my former debate students, and now grown, suited, sharp. He had been quiet in school, anxious even. I once stayed after class to help him write his first speech. In it, he'd said, "People listen when they feel seen." He walked toward me with disbelief turning to recognition. "Mr. Greene, is it really you?" The receptionist's gum paused mid-chew. Daniel shook my hand with both of his. "My God, I haven't seen you in years. You look..." He hesitated. "Alive. Old?" He settled on. "Well." I nodded. "I'm still kicking." "What brings you here?" he asked, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time, like I mattered. Before I could answer, the receptionist chirped, "He didn't have an appointment." Daniel turned to her, the warmth gone from his voice. "He doesn't need one. This man built half the programs we run today." She blinked, confused. I stood there, surprised at how good it felt, not the praise, but the acknowledgement. The simple truth spoken aloud by someone who remembered. Daniel led me inside. As we walked down the hallway, he spoke about his life, law school, moving back to town, becoming the director of the place. "I wouldn't be here," he said, "if it weren't for you." The words settled deep inside me. Warm. Heavy. Healing. We reached his office. He sat down, leaned forward. "What are you doing these days, Mr. Greene?" I almost said nothing. Almost admitted the loneliness, the empty table, the silence of forgotten connections. But for the first time in years, I didn't want to describe myself as abandoned. I wanted to become more than that. So I said, I was thinking about returning. Teaching again. Maybe a small group. Maybe one last lesson. He smiled like I'd handed him a gift. "I'd be honored," he said. "Let's make it happen." When I stepped outside the building, the air felt different, lighter, brighter. Not because the world had changed, but because I had finally stopped waiting for someone else to remember me. I remembered myself. And that was the beginning of my quiet revenge. The first day I returned to the community center felt like stepping back into a life I'd left hanging on a hook somewhere. Daniel insisted on calling it a special guest workshop, though I told him I didn't need the fanfare. I just needed a room, a chalkboard, and a few souls willing to listen. The room they gave me was small, fluorescent lights, worn floor, mismatched chairs. But when I walked in, something tightened in my chest. The smell of old textbooks. The hum of nervous anticipation. It reminded me of my very first classroom in 1983. There were 12 students waiting. Teenagers. Some bored, some curious, some dragged there by parents who probably said, "It'll look good on college applications." I didn't blame them. I used to be a stranger to them too. As I walked to the front, I could feel their eyes scanning me. One whispered, "Is he like ancient?" Another muttered, "My grandpa walks faster." I didn't take offense. Age isn't an insult unless you let it be. I picked up a piece of chalk, wrote my name on the board in slow, steady strokes. Walter Greene. A few students exchanged looks, the kind I'd seen for decades. Do we clap? Do we care? Who is this? I turned around and smiled. Before we start, I want to ask all of you a question. Silence. The kind of silence teenagers give when they don't want to participate. I leaned against the desk. What does a person become when the world forgets them? A girl in the back scoffed. Dead. A few laughed. Not cruelly, just thoughtlessly. I nodded. Maybe. Or maybe something else. Maybe a person becomes more than what the world expects. They quieted. I didn't plan a lecture that day. I didn't bring notes or handouts. I just spoke, honestly, painfully, freely. I taught thousands of students in my lifetime. Many of them succeeded. Some of them changed my life. But do you know what happens when you grow old? Their faces soften, curiosity awakening. You become invisible. Not because you've stopped being who you are, but because people stop looking. A boy raised his hand. Is that why you're here? Because people forgot you. I didn't hesitate. Yes. He blinked, surprised at my bluntness. I continued. But forgetting someone doesn't erase them. It doesn't erase their work, or their character, or their value. And it certainly doesn't erase their story. I could see the shift at the moment every student realized this wasn't a lecture. This was a confession wrapped in a lesson. I walked slowly across the room. I lost my wife. I lost my family, in a way. My kids don't call. My grandkids barely know I exist. And yesterday, I paused. 3 former students walked right past me in a diner. Didn't even recognize my face. Their expressions changed, shock, guilt, discomfort. But I lifted my chin. I realized something. Being forgotten is not the same as being gone. The room was silent. So I'm here to teach you one last thing, maybe the most important lesson you'll hear all year. I wrote 2 words on the board. See people. A girl leaned forward. What does that mean? It means don't wait until someone disappears to appreciate them. Don't wait until they're a memory to understand their worth. People fade when you stop looking, not when they stop existing. One of the boys swallowed hard. Another girl wiped her eyes discreetly. I didn't shame them. That wasn't the point. The point was to reach them, and I did. When the session ended, they didn't rush out. They hovered, lingering with questions, thanks, quiet looks of reflection. A few even shook my hand. But the moment that lodged itself in my chest forever came from the shy boy in the second row. He stayed until the room emptied. Mr. Greene, he murmured. Yes. You said people fade when others stop looking, but what about when families fade? What do you do then? I met his eyes, soft, wounded, familiar. You build someplace new where you're seen. Even if it starts with one person. He nodded slowly, like someone who had needed that answer for a long time. As I walked home that evening, the world felt different. Not because the loneliness was gone, it wasn't. But because it no longer felt like my identity. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone else to validate my existence. I was carving it back out myself. And the people who once overlooked me, they would learn that the man they erased was not gone. Just quiet. Quiet, and returning. The workshop became a weekly thing, not because I asked, but because the students insisted. 12 turned into 15, then 20. Teenagers who barely looked up from their phones started showing up early, saving seats for friends, bringing notebooks even when I told them they wouldn't need any. Daniel said, "You've woken something up in them." But what he didn't know was that they'd awakened something in me too. Still, outside those classroom walls, my life remained quiet. Too quiet. Until the afternoon my phone rang, a number I hadn't seen in months. Michael. My son's voice was flat, rushed, the tone he used when he had already decided the conversation wasn't worth his time. "Dad. Hey. Quick thing, we're driving through town Sunday. Thought maybe we could stop by. The kids want to say hi." A lie. An obvious one. The kids never wanted to visit me. They barely remembered I existed. But I didn't say that. "Of course," I responded calmly. "I'll be here." He exhaled with relief that I hadn't asked questions, guilt him, or reminded him of the past. Then he added, "Oh, and don't make it a big thing, okay? We can only stay like 15 minutes. 15 minutes. The amount of time people give to obligations, not loved ones." After he hung up, I just stood in the kitchen, staring at the fridge where old photos still clung by fading magnets. Michael at 8, missing teeth. Emily at 12, holding her science fair ribbon. Linda smiling with her whole face. Once, they couldn't go a day without me. Now they scheduled me the way people schedule dental cleanings, twice a year, out of duty. Sunday came. I cleaned the house even though I told myself I wouldn't. Polished the dining table. Laid out store-bought cookies. Tried not to care. They arrived late, not by minutes, but by an hour. Michael walked in first, holding his phone, barely making eye contact. His wife followed, polite in a distant way. The kids came last, teenage bundles of annoyance, boredom, and earbuds. "Hey, Dad," Michael said, looking at his watch more than at me. I smiled anyway. Not because I was happy, but because the smile was for me, not for him. The visit was awkward from the start. My grandson asked for the Wi-Fi password before he even said hello. My granddaughter complained about the smell of old house. Michael scrolled through messages mid-conversation. At one point, his wife asked, "So, what do you do with your time now?" She didn't mean it cruelly, but the implication hung in the air like dust. Old man, empty life, nothing interesting to offer. I poured tea for myself, water for them. "I teach again," I said plainly. "Workshops. Teenagers." Michael actually laughed, softly, disbelievingly. "Dad, come on. You? Teaching? At your age?" It wasn't the words. It was the tone, dismissive, amused, like the idea was absurd. My granddaughter added, "Isn't that, like, volunteer stuff? For bored old people?" I felt something tighten behind my ribs. Not pain. Not anger. Clarity. I looked at all three generations of my family and realized something simple and brutal. They hadn't forgotten me because life got busy. They'd forgotten me because they stopped believing I was worth remembering. For years, I'd been shrinking myself to keep the peace, speaking softly, asking for little, taking whatever scraps of attention they offered. But that man was gone now. I folded my hands on the table and said, "I'd like to show you something." They looked up, mildly curious, mildly annoyed. I walked into the living room, picked up a worn folder from the bookshelf, and brought it to the dining table. Inside were letters, handwritten notes from my new students. Thank yous. Drawings. Short paragraphs about what they'd learned, how the workshop had changed them, how they'd never forget it. I set the folder in the center of the table for 6. "These," I said, "are from the past month." Michael frowned. "Why are you showing us?" "Because you asked what I do with my time," I said calmly. "This is what I do. This is who I am." Still. My voice wasn't loud. Wasn't angry. But it was steady, a mountain after years of erosion. My family stared at the letters as if they were artifacts of a man they didn't recognize. Because they didn't. For the first time in years, the power in the room shifted, quietly, unmistakably, in my direction. My grandson finally lifted his eyes from his phone. Did you teach all these kids? Yes, I said. My granddaughter whispered, are you famous or something? No, I replied gently. Just not invisible. Michael swallowed hard. A reaction that told me the message had landed where it needed to. They stayed longer than 15 minutes. Not because I asked. Because they didn't know how to leave a room where they no longer held the upper hand. When they finally did go, Michael hugged me, stiff, confused, almost respectful. I closed the door behind them. Stood in the silence. But it wasn't the old silence, the lonely one. This one felt earned. Strong. Peaceful. Because the quietest revenge is not cruelty. It's being someone they can no longer diminish. The week after my family's visit felt strangely calm, like the air after a storm that never quite broke. I kept waiting for the old feelings to return, the heaviness, the resignation, the sense of being unnecessary in my own life. But they didn't. Something had changed in me, something small and quiet but unmistakably strong. And as I walked back into the community center for the next workshop, I realized I wasn't just teaching those teenagers, I was teaching myself how to live again. The room was full before I even opened the door. Students chatting, rearranging chairs, laughing in a way that felt like a warm draft of life I hadn't breathed in years. They paused when they saw me, then straightened up like soldiers at attention. Mr. Greene. Hey, you're early today. Did you read my essay? Their affection, raw, unfiltered, freely given, landed in places that had gone hollow long ago. I smiled. Let's begin. That day's lesson wasn't planned either, most good ones aren't. I wrote a single sentence on the board. A name only disappears when you stop living it. A girl raised her hand. What does that mean? It means, I said, that the world doesn't get to decide when you're finished. People can try to shrink you, define you, forget you, but none of that sticks unless you agree to it. A boy in the back nodded slowly. Like when everyone at school calls you something you're not. Exactly, I said. The power of a name lies in who you choose to be, not who others decide you are. As we talked, debated, argued, and laughed, I felt a strange buzzing in the back of my mind, an intuition I hadn't felt in years. Like something important was approaching, carried quietly on an unseen tide. That something arrived later that afternoon. The workshop had ended. Students had left. I was erasing the chalkboard when Daniel burst in, slightly out of breath. Walter, he said, I need to show you something. He handed me a phone, his, not mine. On the screen was a link, an online article, a video. I couldn't tell at first. My eyes aren't what they used to be. Daniel tapped play. A familiar voice filled the room, shaky, young, emotional. One of my students. The shy boy from the second row. It's about seeing people, he said in the video. Not just looking at them, seeing them. This man taught me that. He spoke about my workshop. About how he'd felt small all his life. How he'd believed he was invisible. How one conversation, one sentence of mine, had changed him. Then he said the words that hit me like a breath to the lungs. His name is Walter Greene. And he reminded me that people don't fade unless we let them. The video ended. I stared at the screen, stunned. Daniel adjusted his glasses, trying to contain a grin. It went viral, he said. Thousands of shares. Comments. People talking about forgotten mentors, grandparents, teachers. And they're saying your name, Walter. Over and over. My throat tightened. Not with pride. Not with ego. With something deeper, a recognition of parts of myself long buried under years of silence. Why would he post something like that? I whispered. Daniel laughed softly. Because you mattered to him. And maybe he wanted the world to see what he saw. I sank into a chair, overwhelmed. I'd spent years shrinking into the background, convinced the world had turned its back on me. And now my name, the same name my own children barely said without impatience, was being spoken by strangers with reverence. Walter Greene, Daniel said gently, "You're not forgotten." Not anymore. I closed my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel it, the weight of years, the ache of neglect, but also the unexpected warmth blooming in the spaces those aches once occupied. It wasn't fame. It wasn't validation. It was something purer. Being seen again. Later that evening, as I walked home, a group of teenagers passing by on bikes slowed down. "Hey! Aren't you Mr. Greene?" one called out. "The teaching guy. You're online." I chuckled. "So they tell me." They waved and rode off, leaving me in a swirl of sunset light and quiet pride. When I reached my house, I paused before opening the door. The loneliness I had grown accustomed to was still there, but it wasn't my master anymore. It was just a guest. A guest I no longer feared. Because the world had remembered my name. And more importantly, I had remembered it too. The day everything settled, the day the transformation truly completed, wasn't dramatic. No applause. No bright lights. No cinematic music swelling behind me. It was a Thursday. A quiet, ordinary Thursday, the kind that slips through a calendar without making a sound. I had just finished another workshop, a particularly lively one where the students debated whether legacy was something you left behind or something you lived every day. Their conclusions surprised me, challenged me, revived parts of my mind that I thought had rusted over with age. When they left, they didn't rush. They thanked me, sincerely, not out of politeness. One girl asked if I'd write a recommendation letter. A boy told me he wanted to study history because of me. Another said, "You made me feel like I matter." I walked home slowly, letting the chilly air settle into my bones. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, shadows that walked beside me like old friends. And when I reached my porch, I saw something I hadn't expected. A car. A familiar one. Michael's. He was standing there with both hands shoved into his pockets, pacing, looking far more uncertain than I had seen him in years. When he noticed me, he straightened. "Dad." "Hey." I nodded. "Michael." For a moment, neither of us moved. The wind carried the smell of dry leaves and the faint hum of distant traffic. He cleared his throat. "Can we talk?" I unlocked the door and stepped aside. He followed me in, slower than usual, as if the house demanded a kind of reverence he'd forgotten. He didn't sit. He just stood there, staring at the family photos on the wall, the ones he hadn't looked at in years. "I saw that video," he said quietly. "The one about you." I kept my voice even. "A student made it." He nodded. "Yeah. I know." Then he added, "I didn't realize. I mean, I knew you used to be a good teacher, but..." He struggled for words, rare for him. "I didn't realize how many lives you change." I didn't respond. Silence has a power of its own, a gravity. He finally sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "Dad. I think I forgot how to see you. Really see you. I'm sorry." The apology wasn't dramatic. It wasn't tearful. It wasn't poetic. But it was real. And I felt it settle inside me like warm water closing over cold stone. He looked up at me then, not as a child looking at his father, not as a man burdened by guilt, but as someone finally recognizing the truth. "You're not who I thought you'd become," he said. "You're more. I should have treated you better." For years, I would have tried to make him feel better. I would have softened the moment, excused his distance, comforted him instead of myself. But not anymore. I sat across from him, steady. "Michael," I said, "I didn't need you to remember who I was. I needed you to respect who I still am. He swallowed hard. That was the moment he broke, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way adults do when the truth finally dismantles something stubborn inside them. I want to do better, he said. I know, I replied. And I did know, but that didn't mean I'd carry the weight for him anymore. We talked. Slowly. Carefully. Honestly. Not about the past, that was too tangled. Not about blame, that was too easy. We talked about now. About who we'd become. About how to build something new that wasn't rotting from old wounds. When he finally left, he hugged me, a real hug, the kind he used to give in his teens before distance turned him into someone colder. As his car disappeared down the street, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was something infinitely quieter and infinitely stronger. Dignity. Not granted by someone else, reclaimed by myself. That night, I sat at my dining table, the table for 6, and made myself tea. 1 cup, steam rising gently. I didn't feel lonely this time. The empty chairs no longer mocked me. They were simply available. And maybe one day, they'd be filled again. But whether they were or weren't no longer defined my worth. I lifted my cup slightly, not as a toast to anyone else, but to myself. To the name they tried to bury. To the life they thought had faded. To the man who refused to let the world write his final chapter. Walter Greene, I whispered. And for the first time in decades, the name felt whole. My quiet revenge was complete. Not through anger. Not through force. But through becoming someone they could no longer ignore, and someone I could finally respect again. And in that silence, warm and steady, I understood the final lesson. Being seen by others is a gift. Seeing yourself is freedom.
Subscribe and like. And tell your friends about this video.